I give the floor to our friend that belonged to the oldest brothers at St. John Paul. And he was present in our first meeting with the religious leaders when we declare in the name of God trafficking, the new form of slaves in the form of forced labor, prostitution, and traffic of organs is a crime against humanity. I remember very well, and of course he is also a great speaker, and we want to hear about the things that he said in the name of these brothers, oldest brothers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bishop Sanchez-Sorondo, most distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I too, like others before me, wish to commence by thanking the organizers for the invitation and for the opportunity to be enriched by the contributions that we have heard over the course of yesterday and this morning. The call to action of this meeting is in keeping with the Hebrew biblical command that in fact was resonated in Stefano Zamagni's comments last night about modern thought and ethics. And Leviticus 19 states, "You shall not stand idly by while your neighbor's blood is spilt." And we are here focusing upon something that is no less than the spilling of blood, if not physically, certainly figuratively and emotionally. Nevertheless, allow me to qualify the passionate call to stop talking about this issue, or at least not to talk so much about the issue. I think, of course, the need for us to focus on action is really important, but just bringing so many different stakeholders together is of immense significance too. It helps inform, strategize, and inspire, and I think makes the conversation very important. I want to thank the speakers over the last days. I've learned a great deal, and I have very much been inspired by the work of those of you out on the front line combating this scourge. I had no idea so much was being done, even if there's still so much to do so. And I do find that work very inspiring. One of the recurrent themes in the Hebrew Bible is the obligation to care for the vulnerable, i.e. those lacking the protection that the stronger members of society enjoy. Particular mention is made of those who are more easily exploited by virtue of their origins, their sex, their social status, and their age, named as the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. Indeed, God is presented in Exodus 22 as overwhelmingly on their side, indeed biased for them, so that their exploitation is seen as amongst the most heinous of crimes that elicit severe divine retribution. The term orphan in the ancient world designated one who did not enjoy the degree of family adult protection and security necessary. Concerning such a young person, Jewish law makes far-reaching demands on the community to provide both material security, education, and the acquisition of skills to enable that young person to grow with the security that traditional family and community bonds provide for. All of this flowing from the teaching, Marcel, a little bit before Thomas Aquinas, in Genesis, that every human being is created in a divine image, and that therefore any act that diminishes the dignity of another is in fact an act, as it were, that diminishes the divine presence in the world. Contemporary Jewish scholars have argued that in today's world, precisely because modern technology enables traditional forms and structures of protection to be circumvented, if not undermined, all children need to be seen in this category, highlighting the great responsibility on a secure adult community to ensure the protection, the dignity, and the empowerment of children. We have heard most impressive analysis of the various forms of technical prevention and protection, monitoring and prosecution that have to be employed. Religious leaders and organizations should feel obliged to promote this knowledge and better awareness to action to help change the common belief that nothing can be done to prevent child sexual abuse and exploitation, and encourage people to speak up when they see harmful conduct. They can and indeed must help increase understanding of effective prevention strategies and increase awareness of positive developmental approaches that may help avoid the problems. We should be enlisted to add weight to appeals and approaches to governments and various other authorities. However, I must qualify these generalizations. And the idea that has been expressed that suggests that enlisting international religious authorities together will have dramatic impact. I don't think it's insignificant, but we need to bear in mind that religion is not a monolithic phenomenon. Not only are there differences between religions themselves, religion is not in one place necessarily what it is in another. Its relationship to power structures and to authorities differs enormously. And probably you are familiar with the Pew study that indicates that 84% of the world defines itself in religious terms. 84%. But the vast majority here come from that 16% probably. But even in that 16% that does not define itself in religious terms, still looks, even if it finds it difficult to admit, to religious institutions to give some forms of guidance. And the most dramatic illustration of that is Pope Francis himself, who is a kind of a cult figure precisely in secular and often atheistic societies. So there is a very significant role that religion can play, even in the least pious of societies. But what we need to bear in mind is that the way to deal with this phenomenon and engage religion, if it's going to be in any way successful, has to be local. It cannot be global. There is a need for a global guidance, but the application has to be local, understanding the specific conditions and the areas and the forms in which religion can be enlisted, the religious institutions enlisted constructively. Nevertheless, there is, in that context, we have to also understand which religious communities can play a role. And I think that we are lacking here, particularly in terms of the United States' central place within the field of modern technology and usage, religious figures, particularly from evangelical Christian communities, who I think need to be engaged if we are to be able to enlist religion constructively in that context in particular. However, despite the diversity of religions, they all affirm that there is a transcendent reality. And thus, obviously, those of us that are conscious of that presence in our lives and around us are affirming the same and only one God and not different gods, even if our religious approaches and forms differ. Obviously, if the divine relates to us in all our diversity, there must be diverse human ways of relating to the divine. But above all, as has been noted, our religions assert, all of our religions, the inalienable sanctity of divinely endowed human life and dignity. And thus we must be, all of us, in the vanguard of efforts to generate the appropriate social environment and education to render the terrain inhospitable to ideas, let alone practices that exploit children. But I would like to highlight another dimension in the struggle where religious leaders and communities, together with social and educational institutions at large concerned with the welfare of children, can play a significant role. And here my comments will very much resonate with some of those of Sri Sri that we have just heard. Many of you will be familiar with Leila and McIlvanney's study that demonstrates that child abuse, and in particular sexual abuse, involves a wide number of psychological impacts, including low self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. And the study of the American Psychological Association Task Force on the Sexualization of Girls cites research connecting negative sexualization not only with eating disorders, but with low self-esteem, depression, or depressed moods. Other studies confirm that the greater the number of ACE, adverse childhood experiences, the more vulnerable children become. And obviously the sense of impotency and of a negative self-image is intensified even further. However, there are skills that can be imparted to children to enable them to build up their own self-esteem and to resist the threats to their well-being and dignity. In this regard, I would like to mention the remarkable work done regarding child cancer patients by Rabbi Professor Elimelech Goldberg, who was with us yesterday for a while. It is, I believe, as relevant for children facing the spectrum of emotional and psychological threats and manipulation, as well as physical danger. Rabbi Goldberg's work has focused on using martial arts-based meditative techniques to reduce pain and emotional distress. The organization he founded, Kids Kicking Cancer, provides free martial arts-based meditative breathing therapy to help children with cancer and other chronic illnesses, as well as to enable their siblings to cope with emotional pain and distress. These techniques succeed precisely through empowering children to appreciate their own capacities, to boost their self-esteem, enabling them to take creative responsibility for their situation. The research on this work serves as dramatic testimony to its effectiveness through neuroimaging that has demonstrated conclusively how meditation modulates activity and connectivity in corticolimbic regions of the brain involved in a subjective experience of pain, distress, and threat. Children suffering from trauma are taught to use their breath to connect to their souls, to conquer pain, depression, and anger. Combined with a sense of empowerment through martial arts skills, the effect and the evidence are dramatic. Such defensive and assertive techniques both boost self-esteem and enable children to recognize their own abilities to withstand stress, threat, and assault. So I'm not just talking about victims of child abuse, but also how to impart to children understanding and skills to withstand and even resist such abuse. Furthermore, through this work, Rabbi Goldberg and his colleagues have trained a whole army of children to pass on their skills to other children and adults, and empower them accordingly, so that they become agents of change and teachers for such. Religious leaders and congregations, together with the child welfare agencies, could take a significant lead in both familiarizing their communities with these behavioral skills and advancing their programmatic introduction into schools and community centers, thereby enabling children around the world to acquire the tools to respond effectively to attempts to seduce and manipulate them, to take responsibility for themselves, to increase their sense of self-empowerment, and to affirm their inalienable, divinely gifted human dignity. Howard Taylor concluded his remarks yesterday with the beautiful, well-known words of Hillel the Elder. Allow me to conclude with the words of a sage a generation later, Rabbi Tarfon, who said, "It is not your duty to conclude the work, but nor are you free to desist from its pursuit." Thank you.